Rome is one of those destinations that should be on every family's bucket list. From pasta, pizza, and gelato to the endless history and cultural sites you can visit, every family, whether they have young children or teenagers, is going to have an amazing time in Rome. This past summer, we visited Rome with our 4 kids, ranging in ages from 3 all the way up to 10, and it was one of the most memorable trips we've ever taken. We combined that trip with a few days in Venice and a few days in Florence, and we ended our time in Italy with 2 nights in Rome, and I think we could have even used 1 more night there. Rome with kids is always a good idea, but it can be hard to know where to start when you're planning your family trip. I'm going to share everything I learned from our time in Rome, from our favorite spots to visit to the best tours for families. And hopefully this will help you with your planning as you plan your family's bucket list trip to Rome and beyond. On our visit to the Eternal City, we were a group of 8. We have 4 kids plus the 2 parents, and then my parents joined us for our time in Italy. So with 8 people, we decided it would be more economical to stay in a vacation rental like an Airbnb or an apartment from booking.com rather than getting multiple rooms in a hotel. We ended up finding an Airbnb called Claudia Apartment in the Monte neighborhood of Rome, and we didn't really know much about the Monte neighborhood, but I loved that it was within walking distance of the train station. It was within walking distance of most of the big sites you want to see in Rome, and the neighborhood was very quaint, and we had some great restaurants and little shops within walking distance of where we stayed. The apartment was a 3-bedroom apartment, and it had 3 bedrooms and a pull-out couch in the living area, and we used everything. So my parents took one of the bedrooms, my husband and I took the 2nd bedroom, and then there was a 3rd bedroom with bunk beds, and we put our 2 younger kids in that bedroom. And then my 2 older kids, who could stay up a little later, stayed on the pull-out couch in the living room. If it's your first time to Italy, I think you should include Rome no matter what your itinerary holds, whether you're doing the classic Venice, Florence, Rome itinerary, or you're heading out to the coast to visit Cinque Terre or the Amalfi Coast, or you're heading further south. I think a few nights in Rome is going to be so worthwhile. We were combining our trip with 2 nights in Venice, 2 nights in Florence, and 2 nights in Rome before we took a flight from Rome into Athens. And then we ended up spending a week in Greece. So we spent 2 weeks in Europe overall, and Rome was just a small part of our itinerary. I think 2 nights in Rome is the bare minimum if you want to see everything, and that's what we had. But our 3rd day, we had pretty much the full day to play with since our flight to Greece wasn't until the evening. So I think 2 to 3 nights is perfect for Rome. Now, of course, Italy during summer is its high season, so it's going to be fairly expensive to visit as a family. So I'm going to break down the cost of our trip and what I thought was worth the splurge and what maybe wasn't. So as for flights, we actually found flights on Aer Lingus into Venice, and Venice was the first stop on our trip. So we actually flew in and out of Venice. I always find good prices on Aer Lingus. A lot of people recommend using points and miles to get to Europe as a way to save money on the overall cost of the trip. But as a family of 6, and my husband's a teacher, so we have to go during summer, I feel like it's really hard to save up enough points for a family of 6 to find availability for points during high season. And so we ended up saving up and paying for our plane tickets in cash. Our flights on Aer Lingus for 6 people ended up being $5,169. And that came out to $526 for the adult fares and $473 for the 4 children's fares. And that's how we ended up with our total price. So I thought that was a pretty good round trip price for summer in Europe. We booked about 5 months ahead of time. We booked January 10th, and our trip started at the end of May, so around May 28th. So just over 5 months ahead of time. Of course, accommodations are going to be probably the most expensive part of your trip as a family. For 2 nights in our Airbnb, we paid $905, and we ended up splitting that with our parents, so cut that price in half. So we ended up paying around $452, although I told my parents we were 6 people and they were 2, so I offered to pay more like 75%, but they weren't having it. Now, transportation within Italy is super easy. The trains are very efficient and fairly affordable. So our train from Florence into Rome was $146 for our family of 6, which is not bad at all. I think the biggest splurge we had in Rome was on tours and entry fees to the different attractions and places to visit, historical sites and whatnot. We did 3 main tours in Rome to the 3 big sites, the Vatican, the Coliseum tour, and we did a pizza making class. And for our family of 6, those 3 tours added up to just over $1,000. Now, of course, Rome was just a small snapshot of our overall trip to Europe. 1 week in Italy, 1 week in Greece. So to give you an idea of what the overall price for 2 weeks in Italy and Greece for a family of 6, we ended up paying around $13,000 for the entire time, and that includes our flights, accommodations, transportation. I didn't keep great track of food, but I tried to kind of estimate what we spent. We are not foodies by any means. We ate at cheap places, ate a lot of pizza and pasta and gelato, and we didn't really do any fancy sit-down restaurants, just kind of local places we would find near our Airbnb. So if you can visit in summer, yes, it's going to be expensive. Yes, it's going to be hot. Yes, it's going to be crowded, but I personally thought it was worth it. We're a family that is on a regular school schedule. My husband is an educator. He's a school principal, so he can't just take extra time off during the school year. And so if we want to take a big trip like this, it has to be during summer, or we have to like try to squeeze it in quickly during spring break. I thought it was worth it to do it in summer. So if you're a family that is also on a school schedule, you've got sports, it's hard for you to take time off during the school year, hopefully this kind of puts your mind at ease. Okay, next let's talk about tours and classes that you can sign up for as a family in Rome. As soon as you know the dates you're going to be visiting, I would highly recommend getting your tours booked. They fill up very quickly, and if you wait too long, you're going to end up panicking because you can't get into the tours you want to see. And the last thing you want to be doing in Rome with your kids is waiting in 2-hour-long lines in the heat in the middle of the day. I would say to book your tickets at least 3 to 4 months in advance, if not more, if at all possible. Okay, I'm going to talk about the 1 class and the 2 tours we took in Rome as a family and whether I think they were each worth it. So the first one we did is a pizza making class in Rome. This is one that my parents suggested, and I agreed to it. I thought it sounded fun, but I definitely had some concerns about whether it would be kid-friendly or not. I was picturing a big group of people and my kids kind of just getting bored or left out or just kind of tired because it's like a 3-hour class. And my kids were still pretty young, so I wasn't sure if they would have the attention span to really focus and get anything out of this 3-hour class. But I decided to say yes. We booked the pizza making class in Rome, and it ended up being one of the best decisions we ever made. This is one of our family's favorite memories from our trip to Rome. We booked the class through Viator, and the tour operator is called Eat Walk Italy. I'm going to link the class below so you can find my affiliate link below so you can book the exact class that we took. Somehow we ended up being the only people included in this small group cooking class. Maybe that's because we were such a big group, so they really couldn't fit anyone else in the class because there were 8 of us. And like I mentioned before, the class is 2 hours and 30 minutes, and then you have time to sit and eat your pizza afterward that you've made. So I had concerns about whether the kids would be engaged the whole time, but I didn't need to worry because the whole family ended up loving it, even the younger kids. So a local Italian chef leads the class and teaches you how to make the dough from scratch, walking you through the different techniques that he uses and kind of walks around and helps you out. And each person gets their own station at this large table for the pizza making class. We had a great time learning about how pizza is made by a real Italian chef, and I loved that he paid special attention to the kids. He walked over, he helped them, and he even taught them how to toss their dough in the air, and we had so much fun cracking up watching the kids try to toss their dough, and he gave us a demonstration of how he tosses the dough in the air. And of course, he was much more skilled than any of us. So that was definitely a highlight, and I was so glad I caught it on video. The chef leading our class had us laughing the entire time. What I loved about this is that even though it was kind of long, not only was it like this fun cultural experience, but it also took care of dinner for one of the nights we were there. So yes, it was expensive, $300 for 6 people in our family, but we at least got dinner out of it. We got the most memorable experience, and we had so much fun. I'm so glad we did this tour. I would highly recommend it to any family looking for something to do in Rome. The second group tour we booked through Viator in Rome was the small group guided tour of the Vatican Museums, Sistine Chapel, and St. Peter's Basilica. I would highly recommend taking a tour, especially if you're traveling there with kids, because the grounds are absolutely extensive, and you're definitely not going to get everything out of it if you try to tour the museums and the Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's Basilica all on your own. The tour includes skip-the-line tickets to get into the Vatican Museum, which helps you avoid long lines with kids, and it comes with audio headsets that you can listen to as you're walking through the museum and your guide is explaining what you're looking at. Now, I'm going to stop here and recommend something we learned the hard way. I think you should bring your kids' headphones on the tour with you. While the audio headsets do come with headphones that you can put in your ears, they're the cheap kind that like you get for free on airplanes, and they're made for adults. So my kids tried listening to them, but even my older kids got uncomfortable after a few minutes and just ended up taking them out. So they really couldn't listen to the whole tour, which means they were a bit less engaged. Although they could still hear the guide by going closer to her, it was sometimes hard because we're a big group with young children, so we couldn't always be at the front of the pack. So if you have younger kids with small ears, bring their headphones that you can plug into the audio guide so that they can listen to. I think one of the biggest benefits of this tour is that our guide was able to explain everything we needed to know about the Sistine Chapel before we went into the Sistine Chapel. And I think that's really important because you are not supposed to talk in the Sistine Chapel. You're supposed to be quiet and just admire the ceiling and the paintings. And she was able to explain everything we needed to know about Michelangelo's masterpiece before we went in there. And she was able to explain the rules to us. And so we were able to be in there, admire the artwork for a few minutes, and then move our way to the back. It's so crowded inside the Sistine Chapel. Like, you're like shuffling along right next to people. You can barely move. It's also important to note that you cannot take pictures or videos inside the Sistine Chapel. And so you're really in there to admire it and then move to the back. The tour then ends at St. Peter's Basilica, where you're admiring some more artwork, learning a bit more history. And the entire tour is 3 hours. So I think any longer and it just would have been too much for the kids. But by that end, by St. Peter's Basilica, our 3-year-old was kind of ready to be out of the stroller. We did bring a stroller on this guided tour. Most of it was stroller friendly, but there were a few points where we needed to fold it up and carry it. We used the Zoe Tour stroller, which is really lightweight, easy to set up and take down. So if we needed to do that, it was super easy to do that. But yeah, by the end of the 3 hours, my 3-year-old was ready to be done. She was kind of not listening at all in St. Peter's Basilica, which is to be expected of a 3-year-old. She did amazing on the tour. So I kind of walked around with her and then switched off with my husband so I could check out what I missed. But yeah, by the end of that 3 hours, we were good to go. And just like the other tours and classes, I will make sure my affiliate link is below so you can find the exact tour we did. The last tour we did was the Skip the Line Coliseum, Roman Forum, and Palatine Hill tour. I don't know if I pronounced that right. This was another tour we booked through Viator and ended up being one of our favorite things to do in Rome. We had the best tour guide. His name was Giuseppe. I don't know, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. He was so funny and engaging. He told so many stories and really made sure the kids got a lot out of the tour. While our whole family definitely enjoyed this tour, I think this is an excellent tour for kids of like elementary age to middle school age because it's so fun for them to learn about the history of the Coliseum. And my 8-year-old and 10-year-old were especially interested in this Coliseum tour. You start by exploring the ancient ruins of the Roman Forum, which is the center of social life and commerce for ancient Romans. And you may have trouble picturing what it looked like at one point because you're really just seeing like the foundations of the buildings, essentially they're ruins. So it's kind of hard to picture what it looked like when it was thriving. And that's why I loved having a tour guide, because he could open up his little book and he had like a painting with a rendering of what it would have looked like when it was thriving and vibrant and the center of life. Next, you'll climb up the hill and get panoramic views of Rome and Circus Maximus before heading over to the Coliseum. There's quite a bit of walking on this tour. Once again, we did have the stroller. I don't know if it was the best decision because there are several parts that are not necessarily stroller friendly. But again, we had the travel stroller, so it was fine. We made it work with the stroller. We finished the tour walking through the Coliseum, which was really a highlight. And one of the reasons I would recommend taking a tour is because you get to walk out on the arena floor as part of the tour and you get skip the line tickets. So to me, that is really worth it, in addition to like all of the value and the stories that the tour guide brought to the experience. I loved watching the kids imagine what it would be like to be a gladiator looking up into the stands, and that's why it was so cool to be on the arena floor. Once we got off the arena floor, we found a shady spot within the Coliseum, and this was kind of my favorite part because our guide told us a bunch of stories about what the different battles in the Coliseum would have looked like. He talked about some of the myths and then some of the things they don't know about and what his theories were, and I really liked that he didn't just give us the facts, but he gave us some of his theories. That was really fun. At this part, my kids were really fascinated. They were like listening so intently as he told these stories and described what the battles were like. Of course, with the exception of my 3-year-old, but she did fine with a snack. So it was just so cool to see history come to life for them on this Coliseum tour. One tip for the tour is to bring a reusable water bottle because there are a few spots where there are fountains with potable water where you can fill up your water bottle. It gets very hot. Bring sunglasses, bring hats, bring sunscreen because you're going to be walking out in the sun a lot and it gets hot in Rome during the day. All right, let's talk about some of the tourist attractions we visited that we didn't have tours for, we just visited on our own. First is the Trevi Fountain. Of course, it's free to visit and it's fun to throw your coin in. You're supposed to close your eyes, throw the coin over your left shoulder with your right hand. And if you do that, they say that one day you will return to Rome. So hopefully all of us will be returning to Rome. While the Trevi Fountain is free to visit, it is almost always crowded. And even if you go early in the morning nowadays, you're still going to be surrounded by other people that are trying to beat the crowds and get their picture. But here's what I'll say. We visited in the late afternoon, and while the crowds were pressing in all around the Trevi Fountain, I found that everyone there was polite and efficient. Everyone took their picture, threw their coin, and then moved away so that someone else could take that spot, throw their coin, get their picture. It was all very organized. Now, of course, any crowded touristy area, you want to be aware of your surroundings, watch out for pickpockets, keep your valuables close and in front of you. But honestly, we had no issues. I didn't mind the crowds at all. Everyone was so polite and we really enjoyed it. Another free spot to visit is the Pantheon. The Pantheon was once a temple built to honor the Roman gods. That is now a Catholic church. Several important historical figures, including the Renaissance artist Raphael, are buried there. One of the unique features of the Pantheon is the dome at the top with the huge oculus or hole in the middle. The Pantheon was free to visit. I did read that they may start charging €5 per person, so just make sure you look that information up ahead of time. An architectural marvel and really cool to see. Of course, while you're in Rome, you have to visit the Spanish Steps. It's one of the most famous sites to see and again, free to visit. You don't need much time here, but cool to see and walk up and down if you want to. Have your kids look for the Egyptian obelisk at the top of the steps and the fountain at the bottom of the steps. You really only need a few minutes here, but I would say one of the highlights and good things to know if you're visiting with kids is that one of the fanciest McDonald's in the world is just a few blocks away, just a few steps away from the Spanish Steps. So while I don't always recommend eating McDonald's when you go to another country, it is fun to see the different menu items and see like how fancy this particular McDonald's was. And I will say our kids were just excited to see something and eat something familiar. To me, those are the main things that you should do while you're in Rome with kids. I'm sure there are a lot more activities you could find, parks, playgrounds, cool neighborhoods to walk through and that sort of thing. But if you're like us and you have other cities on your itinerary, I think those are the main highlights that you should enjoy while you're in Rome. Okay, things to know before you go to Rome. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it is crowded and there's a lot of traffic. And I would say compared even to, especially to Venice, because there are no cars in Venice, and then also compared to Florence, it was just a lot more crowded and noisy, and so we really had to be aware of our surroundings when we were walking on the sidewalk with the kids, trying to keep them away from the edge of the sidewalk. So we made sure the parents walked on the outside and the kids walked on the inside of the sidewalk. You might hear people say not to use strollers in Rome because of the uneven cobblestone sidewalks and streets, but I can't imagine doing as much walking as we did without having a stroller for our toddler. And even for our 6-year-old, he had just turned 6 years old. So while that is a little old to be using a stroller, sometimes we had to switch the two kids out because we were just doing so much walking in the heat, and it was nice for him to get a little break, and we got a break from the whining. Our Zoe tour stroller handled the cobblestones and uneven sidewalks like a champ, and it steers so easily with one hand. I will link this stroller below. If you use my link, you get $15 off your first purchase. No code needed. We've used it in the Florida Keys, Puerto Rico, Europe, all over Europe, San Diego, Washington, D.C. You can put it in the overhead bin of many airplanes, so if you want to bring it as a carry-on, you can do that. I just love our Zoe tour. It is the best travel stroller I've ever owned. One thing I was a little worried about before we went to Italy was what the restaurant situation was going to be, because I kept seeing on social media people like making reservations ahead of time, suggesting restaurants, and in my mind, with 4 young kids, you just never know when the kids are going to hit a point where they just need to eat. They're getting so crabby. And so I didn't feel comfortable like planning out our food ahead of time. So I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to find restaurants that could fit our family of 6 plus my parents, so our party of 8. And while that was sometimes the case, for the most part, we found so many restaurants that were welcoming and opening to our big, loud group, and they treated our kids so respectfully and like made our kids laugh and treated them like human beings. Which kind of sounds silly to say, but sometimes in the US, when you walk in somewhere with a bunch of kids, you just get a lot of glares. But we found so many like neighborhood cafes and sidewalk cafes and easy places to grab pizza, pasta, and gelato. It really was not a problem to find places to eat with our kids. Okay, one thing to know about getting to and from the airport in Rome, because we did fly to Athens from Rome, is that they do have a train called the Leonardo Express that goes from the Roma Termini, I probably pronounced that wrong, the Roma Termini train station. Termini? I don't know. But anyway, it takes you from the train station to the airport, and it's an express train. So use the Leonardo Express to get to and from the airport. I just booked it on the TRENITALIA website. I'll link that below. And that's an easy way to get back and forth from the airport because it actually is surprisingly far outside of city center. The train ride was like 40 minutes. So you're kind of far outside the city when you fly in and out of Rome. Okay, so those are all my tips for visiting Rome with kids. We had the best time. I loved Italy with our kids. And even though I'm planning some really exciting trips this summer, I still feel a little bit sad that we're not going back to Italy, because the more I think back on that trip, the more I just loved the atmosphere, the history, walking through these centuries-old streets and just eating gelato, and there's nothing like the vibe of Italy. So I know I have to go back someday. Because we only did those 3 cities, Venice, Florence, and Rome, I know I have to go back and do Cinque Terre and the coast and Bologna and all of these other smaller cities outside of the main tourist corridor that just deserve attention and time to enjoy. So I know someday we'll be going back to Italy with the kids, but we do have to start saving up because it's not cheap. especially as a family of 6. So hopefully this travel guide will help you plan your family's trip to Rome and beyond. We had the best time, and I hope to go back to Italy someday soon. And if you want to see our entire itinerary, I'll link the video up above that has our entire 2-week itinerary for Italy and Greece. All right, keep making memories with your kids and keep exploring.